This is not going to be a long story, or a particularly scary one either, but I think it's a story worth sharing nonetheless. I should say that it happened less than 24 hours ago, on February 8th at 2:45 in the morning. I would never think it would happen, but here I am, sitting in my room and writing about this. It was a lonely, sleepless night, one of many for me, so I decided to get my mind off things and do something spontaneous, like walking around downtown Vancouver, alone at night. What a great idea for a 17-year-old whose viable option for self-defense is running away, right? When I first came to Canada, I thought and hoped it would be a completely safe country with little to no crime at all. Today was I disillusioned. When I hopped off the bus after an hour-long ride, I decided to walk around familiar places at first, and then do some exploring later. The first part of the journey was decent, but not really worth mentioning. But when I walked to more secluded areas, things got bad. I heard a distant repetitive metal clinking sound, but didn't pay attention to it at first. There were some interesting signs that attracted my attention, so I stopped to read them. That's when I saw someone walk around the corner, start approaching me. I also realized that metal noise had stopped. A man started walking towards me, but didn't say anything, which didn't make me feel comfortable. I started walking. He was much shorter than me, had relatively long blonde hair, and I think he wore a hat. That's what I got from a few brief glances at him. I left the area and started walking towards the nearest road. Every 20 or so steps I would glance back and see him behind me. When I reached the road, I decided to do the chase check and jaywalked across the road. Sure enough, he did the same thing. That's when I realized I was being followed. Nervous, I was looking for people, cars, anything that could protect me. But it was too late for people to be walking around. I turned a corner, then another, went all over the place, desperately hoping to lose him. Eventually, he would no longer be able to see me, and when he lost sight of me, I could hear him yell, "Fuck!" I walked into a well-lit street, but there still wasn't anyone around, so I started to run. Just run someplace safe. Eventually, I found a bridge which I could cross on foot, so after roughly 10 minutes of walking, I crossed it and found myself at yet another street, the bus station being only 6 blocks away. I got on the bus after waiting for 30 minutes and went back to my university campus. I don't know what that man's intentions were, but it probably wasn't anything good. He seemed determined to catch up with me, so I was fortunate to have escaped his potential grasp. For all I know, it could have been another junkie out of his mind. But what if he had a weapon? I hope I never meet him again and find out. When I was a child around 8 or 9, there was a series of events that happened at my house. It all began one night when I was walking to the bathroom. The path to the bathroom was like a T formation. To the left was a side door leading outside. The doorknob started wiggling like someone was trying to open it. I told my parents and they checked, but the person had already gone. A few nights later, I heard the doorknob rattle again. My parents went to check again. Then the front doorknob started rattling. This went on periodically for a while. At times it was 3 doors. Others it was one that we heard. We would find footprints in the snow all around the house in the morning, even when we did not hear anyone. The footprints would lead into and out of a wooded area. Then one night, it was snowing. No noises at all, so I went to bed. No one heard anything that night. When we woke up, someone glanced out one of the windows and saw one boot. We all looked closer. There was one boot and no footprints anywhere in the snow. My father went outside and got the boot to see whose it was. It was a man's boot and bigger than the one he wore. When my father was outside getting the boot, he found a few cigarettes in closer to the window, where the snow did not get to as easily. No one in my family smoked. We stopped noticing anything for a while, thought it had stopped. During the summer, we had a trampoline up close to the wooded area. There was a net around it, so the only entrance and exit was at the side of the woods. One afternoon, I was jumping and I had this strange feeling, so I turned around and saw a figure in the woods. Someone was just sitting there watching me. I started screaming for my parents who were inside. The person took off running deeper into the woods. We never did find anyone, but occasionally would find footprints outside the house that clearly were not ours. So these occurrences happened to me while I was in high school, and it really freaked me out. One night my boyfriend at the time, we'll call him John, and I were heading back to my house to drop me off after a date night. It's pretty late at this point, probably around 10:30 to 11 p.m. And we park and do kid stuff, like making out like most teenagers do. Then all of a sudden a dark-colored car pulls up diagonally from us on the other side of the street. Nothing weird at first. We continue on our merry way. But as time goes by, I mean like a good at least 10 minutes, no one has exited the car. Well, they could be waiting for someone, right? Wrong. The house they were in front of was pitch black. So as time goes by, I'm starting to get a little freaked out. Also, I should note we can't even see in the windows of the car because the windows were so tinted. I tell John that we should get out and we should leave, and at this point he's still trying to kiss me. So I give in, and as he walks me to my door and we kiss more, the car just sits there, and as we finally reach my door, it leaves. I was majorly freaked out, obviously, but I let it go. But then comes the next day. When I get home from school, the same car pulls up. No one gets out yet again. They eventually leave, but again without anyone ever getting out. As the weeks go by, I continually watch the car. Sure enough, a few times I see the same car drive by my house, very slowly, then just speed away. One night it happened while I was home alone. It was one of the most frightening experiences of my life. But then as quickly as it had started, it ended, and I never saw the car again. In all my years working security, nothing comes close to this in terms of the craziest thing I've ever seen while working. Back in 2009, I was working full-time as a security guard for a business that was rather new at the time. My job was to drive out to several locations that hired us to do patrols after their respective closing times, as well as check up on their buildings and structures to make sure they were locked up properly. I worked the graveyard shift and split my time between our local hospital and patrolling. One of the locations I visited regularly during this time was a self-storage business where you could go and pay a weekly or monthly fee to rent out a unit for whatever you needed it for. I only visited the business once or twice a night at designated times due to its somewhat secluded location and long distance. I should mention that no one should be there with me because when the place closes at 10 p.m., the units are gated off, and only the owner and security have access through the automated gate via key card, while the outer perimeter is surrounded by chain link fences. The only exception is the west side of the business, which isn't fenced off, and instead shares a border with a large wooded area. On this particular night, I showed up for my first visit, and everything went routine. I drove through the gate and parked nearby with my trusty flashlight. walked around to check on the locks of the office and each individual unit to make sure they were all closed and secured. Everything looked good and I left. I come back a couple of hours later around 3:30 a.m. for my final patrol and security check of the night. I'm walking down the final row of units checking the locks when I came up to one that wasn't locked, number 27. When I had come by earlier it was locked, but now it wasn't. I lifted up the door to the unit and shined my flashlight inside. To my horror, I saw the butchered remains of a hog lying on a small wooden table in the center of the unit. I gasped at the smell, shined my flashlight around, saw that the unit was empty, except for the table and the dead hog. I noticed that its innards were strewn across the table. Blood soaked the table and there was even some of it on the floor of the unit. I closed the unit almost as fast as I had opened it and hurriedly ran back to my vehicle to make note of what I had found and to call 911, all while trying not to vomit. I was redirected to the state police, and the dispatcher sent somebody out, but it would take them about 20 minutes to arrive. He told me to stay there and wait for them, so I did. I drove away and parked my vehicle in an area where you couldn't see it from the unit, and it sat waiting, typing down what I had found on my company laptop. Once I was done, I took a position where I could see the unit from a distance and keep my eye on it. I looked at my phone a little while later and noticed that 15 minutes had gone by. I sat there waiting patiently for the trooper to arrive when I saw somebody coming from the wooded area, walking towards the row of units where Unit 27 was. I noticed that he was carrying something with him, but couldn't make it out exactly what it was. I sat and watched, and sure enough the man opened up and entered Unit 27 without closing it behind him. I was trained only to intervene when a crime is taking place, trespassing in this man's case, verbally and never physically unless to defend myself. But due to the circumstances surrounding this particular instance, I kept my distance and just watched instead of confronting him. I called the dispatcher back and told him this new information and the description of the man: Caucasian, thin, of average build, probably around my weight, wearing a black hoodie and sweatpants. I watched the unit closely, and eventually the man came back out empty-handed and shut it behind him. I didn't see him lock it and assumed he would be back once again. Once he was out of sight, it took about another 3 minutes or so until I saw one of the troopers drive by. I continued to wait on the phone with dispatch and was eventually told that they found the man and had him in custody, and that the other trooper would arrive to talk to me so I can give him the full details. All in all, they found the dead hog, a jar, a large knife, and an empty bucket inside the unit. I learned that the man was actually only 15 years old and had access to the unit because his parents had rented it out for a month, but never ended up using it. He was going to be charged as a juvenile with trespassing and animal cruelty. I heard nothing of it afterwards, not even as much as an article on our local news site. I wondered for a while afterwards what would have happened if he had arrived sooner and found me looking inside the unit. Would he have attacked me? Surely he wouldn't want anyone to know about what he was doing. And if he'd been willing to kill innocent animals, who's to say he wouldn't kill a man? I had neglected to mention about his intent. When I was speaking to the trooper who stopped by to talk to me, information was relayed to him that the boy killed the hog for no legitimate reason, i.e. for food, etc., and that he had killed animals before, but he didn't state how he acquired the pig. My apologies for not remembering to include it in the story. My dad was in the hospital, and the house we lived in had what we would call cellar doors on the outside. They were metal, and you pulled them up towards you to open them. The lock was broken, and my dad had not gotten around to fixing it, because we lived in a safe neighborhood. So safe that most people left their keys in their cars. Anyway, in the basement was our utility box for the phone and electric. It was an old house with a cistern and half dirt, half concrete basement. We kept getting hang-up calls, and I would tell my mom I kept hearing noises in the basement. Once you go into the basement from outside, you could walk up the steps to the door that leads to the kitchen, and that was a very flimsy door secured with a chain lock. These calls went on for months, and they escalated to where the person would tell me what I wore to school, what I'd been doing, and who I was with. We did file police reports, and we finally got them to tap our landline. My mom and I were up watching a movie at 2 a.m. My brother fell asleep on the couch when the phone rang. My mom and I looked at each other, and I said, "I'll get it." Now she told me to keep him on the phone as long as I can, and that we need a good 2 to 3 minutes of conversation for the phone company to get his location. I was able to keep him on the phone, but I was a mess. I started crying. He seemed to like that. He would tell me it was just a matter of time before he came to get me and make me his. I hung up the phone and it rang within a few minutes, but this time my mom got it and started cussing as soon as she answered. Then she just stopped talking, hung up the phone and said we would have to leave now and be quiet. She grabbed her purse while I was waking up my brother to get to the car. We left the TV and lights on as we left. My mom looks white as a ghost, and I could tell she was pretty scared. She went to a gas station and called my grandmother so we could come over. I asked her who was on the phone, and she said it was a police department. She said the call was coming from somewhere in the house, and to get out now. The cops were at our house, searching. Mom also called the police station to tell them where we were going, and they told her officers were at the home searching. We got to my grandma's house and my mom called the police station again, and they had the officer call her back to tell her what they found. They did not catch the guy, but he left the device he was using still attached to the box thing. We were told it was a kind of phone the employees of the phone company used to verify that the lines were working. They did not catch him, and we had a few more incidences. The police talked to employees who were in our area, working on lines or installing phones, but nothing ever panned out. When my dad came home, we told him about what had happened. He kept a gun out from the gun cabinet for easy access. Eventually, it just stopped. It was very weird and an unnerving experience. I'm so glad I'm safe. Thanks for watching, guys. Please be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe to join the Sinful Society. You know what to do now. Stay sinful.